r/Askreddit by Spreadit. Serious travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late night shifts. What's your scary story? I was the navigation officer for a research ship in the South Pacific. We had recently come to Papua New Guinea for some work along the coast. We had arrived in a small bay at around 10 p.m. in the dark and dropped the anchor. I went over to mark our position on the chart and noticed an annotation that said native village reported in the area. There were no fires or lights on the coast, so I didn't think anything much more of it. I turned on all the deck and underwater lights and went back into the bridge to stand my night watch as everyone else went to bed. With all the lights on, I couldn't see further than about 25 yards because of a light mist in the pitch black night. I sat in the bridge with the door open because I like the sound of the night and the feeling of the air in the tropics. I kept hearing lights splashing in the water and went out to sea because often we get hundreds of fish in our underwater lights. There was nothing there. I went back inside but kept hearing faint splashing and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Since I couldn't see into the distance, I went into the chart room and flicked on our infrared camera system, and there they all were. About 50 native outrigger canoes just sitting outside our pool of light. About 3 people to a canoe and all just sitting and watching us. Occasionally paddling one way or the other to keep their station. I have never felt so suddenly and violently alone and small as I did on that ship in the dark. I got a deckhand up and we both just walked around the decks to show that people were awake and moving. They sat there and watched us all night. Completely invisible except for on the infrared cameras. In the morning they came in and traded with us and were very friendly and just hadn't had a ship in their bay for decades. I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we behind and Sav on the road. We were behind them for a good while when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and 2 sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavy. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the Sav called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I'd persisted. Once I was working in a restaurant and got done at around 12ish. I always rode my bicycle to and from work. It was about 15 minutes along a bike trail next to the train tracks. This trail was constantly straight, but had quite a few exits here and there. It also only had a few small parts of it lit up by street lights, so without my front bicycle light I would be totally blind for the most part. So this one night I leave OMW home after the shift, and I notice a guy is biking behind me, which isn't too weird at that time of night in a busy, but very safe, city. It was weird that he had no lights and was still there after the first main exit, which after that led to a small town, but I thought it might just be a coincidence. I felt a bit creeped out and thought I might just be tired and the dark of the night is getting to me. So I decided to bike a bit slower and let this person pass. There was definitely enough room on this trail. The person started drifting along at the same speed as me and made no attempt to pass or even come closer. This is about when I'm a few minimum away from home and decide to take some random lefts and rights instead of going straight home just in case this person was following me and wouldn't find out where I live. I bike around going in random twists and turns in a suburban neighborhood and he's still behind me. What I then did is I noticed I was heading straight for a long small dark path only for bicycles. I decided to turn into one of the houses and hide in the dark shadows from their garage. I heard this person pass the house and brake quickly in that small path. At this moment my blood is boiling. Now I hop on my bike, and when I passed the edge of that street I stopped and stared that person in the eyes. Well, that's what I hoped he thought, cause I actually couldn't see anything of his face. I biked so fast then did another few extra loops here and there until I felt safe and alone again to go home. Never had anything like it afterwards and still don't know who or why it could have been. I'm happy not knowing. Edit. I'm an average sized girl and in my early 20s when this happened. I worked at a movie theater and most often worked the closing shift. One night me and another manager were sitting in the small office. She was working on the nightly deposit and I was finishing up inventory numbers. We had a CD player that we would listen to at night with a stack of CDs sitting next to it. I stood up and changed the CD and sat back down. About a minute after, the entire stack of CDs launched itself across the room. One of the CDs hit my coworker in the back of the head. She looked around and saw me sitting there dumbfounded with the CDs scattered all around me in the office. We quickly finished up and left. A couple of days later one of the other day shift managers calls me and asks me what we were doing the prior night. She seemed really annoyed, which was out of character for her because we were friends. I asked her what she meant, and she asked me why we had dumped all of the security tapes onto the floor and left them there. I told her we hadn't touched the security tapes at all. The tapes were stored on top of the CCTV monitor on a small VHS tape shelf. The shelf hadn't been moved, and only the tapes were on the floor. She also said that all of the sleeves from the tapes had been removed and thrown all over the place too. I came back into my camp from cooking/cleaning/taking a dump and found an individual digging around in my tent and gear. I quietly watched the person from a bit away while they rummaged around, eventually leaving while taking nothing. Packed up all my shit and hiked through in the dark. There's zero good things that could come from someone else looking through your gear in the middle of the woods as nighttime approaches. Don't know what they wanted, don't want to find out. I had freshly turned 18 and was working a closing shift at a small cafe in a grocery store. One of my regular customers comes in, Tom. Tom was a hugger. He'd come in and call out, "Where's my girls?" and we'd all have to awkwardly hug this 80-year-old man while he whispered "God bless you" in your ear. I hated Tom. He always held on a little too long and whispered a little too close. On this shift, I was closing alone and Tom came in at about 4 p.m. Not unusual, I dealt with the creepy and got him his coffee and bagel. He was with his wife this time. She was sweet but tired looking. He started asking me questions as I worked. What do I have to do at night? Is it hard closing alone? What time am I off? Do I ever get scared walking to my car in the dark? The questions got progressively more uncomfortable and his wife just sat there silently. I answered as friendly as I could, despite the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I would catch him staring at me often. It was okay though, I was off work at 7, so it wasn't a big deal. Until he didn't leave. His wife went home without him, and he just stayed, staring, for hours. I asked if there was anything else he needed. He said, "No, I'm just waiting for you to get off of work." He wanted to walk me to my car, he said, because young girls shouldn't be in a dark parking lot alone. I told him it wasn't necessary and continued about my work, ignoring him now even as he stared. He left about 15 minutes before my shift ended, into the dark Michigan winter, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't think twice when I punched out and headed to my car. I grabbed my snow brush and began clearing my car, enjoying the quiet that's unique to a snowy night. I began to hear the crunching of footsteps behind me. I brush it off. I'm in a parking lot, after all. But they get closer, past any other car, and directly towards my car, parked away from the others in employee parking. I look, and it's Tom, maybe 50 feet away and smiling. He tells me that I should have looked for him. He had been sitting outside waiting for me, and I should know it's dangerous for young girls to be alone in a parking lot at night. I began shaking. I tried to open my car door, but it was frozen shut due to the earlier storm. Tom came closer, calling me a stupid girl, and asking God to forgive him. I debated running back into the store. He was so old he surely couldn't keep up, right? I didn't want to chance it, though. He could have been younger as I'm a terrible judge of age, and I'm not exactly fast myself considering my weight. So I stand my ground. I fumble in my purse for my pepper spray, thankfully attached to my keys. I tell him to stay back, I have pepper spray, and to go home to his wife. He glowers at me. I show him the teal canister. We are about 15 feet apart now, he's well within range. He calls me a bitch, spits at me, and heads back into the store. I get in my half-uncovered car and drive home, terrified. I called the store when I got home, only a mile and a half away, so about 2 minutes, and told them what had happened. They kicked Tom out and told him not to come back. He began cursing up a storm and his wife had to come pick him up. He ended up getting arrested for child pornography a couple years later, but I don't know the details as I had moved away at that point. Can't say I'm sad to see him go, though.